Hey, we're back in the hot seat because now I finally get to know a little bit more about how my city is doing. So this is the city of Delta, British Columbia. That's where I live. I was able to do some of the numbers for 2012 just to see sort of where we were. I'm going to be going back and doing 2013, 2014 because if the 2012 numbers were there, probably I can find with a bit of internet sleuthing my 13 and 14 numbers as well. But Mitch, we just put all of that work into filling out these details for 2024. And we took note of, for example, back in 2022, the numbers got restated. So that's why the benefit of working from the most recent report that you have available to you, working your way backwards is going to be really useful. So that way each year you're using the corrected numbers as you go along. Not normally a big deal, but just it helps to be accurate because it also helps to build that credibility when people say, so what is it that you're talking about? And you're like, all right, let me walk you through this. So walk me through our city's net financial position is up, which is good, right?
Yeah, so I mean, we want to see an upward trend in general, but of course, none of these metrics can be looked at in isolation. You can't just look at this one thing and be like, we're doing fine, because it all
Yeah.
fits in with a whole bunch of other things, even other things that you can look at that aren't even in this tool. But yeah, in general, we're looking for an upward trend. We would like it to be in a positive number. And so yeah, so in general, this looks like it is trending in the right direction.
Mhm.
How much of a positive number and how much of a positive trend line, um, there is no definitive answer for that, right? So that'll depend on your city's infrastructure, on your city's goals as a community. It'll, you know, how positive and how steep this line is will depend on decisions you make as a community. So, but in general, yeah, we need it to be going upwards, and we need it to be a positive number if we are to even to entertain being sustainable
Yeah.
financially. So yeah, so this is
Yeah.
already encouraging.
I mean, we are a city that has seen a runaway housing market, and that is undoubtedly contributing to different revenues that are coming in, transfers, taxes, things like that. Improvements in people's ability to be able to cover property taxes, but that is a smaller thing.
Yeah, what
Within
what
that,
what what this means essentially is, like, as your infrastructure as a city comes up for maintenance and renewal, this is where the money's going to come
right?
from this
Yeah,
graph. And so if it's a negative number, that means you don't have money for it. If it's a,
yeah.
a declining number, that means eventually you won't have enough money for it,
Mhm.
right? So you need this, and because of inflation, this number is going to continue to be a higher and higher number over time, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
I'm curious. Our Delta Chamber of Commerce just released a letter to the city, noting that we had a significant surplus and saying we need to put that back into infrastructure. And I was like, "Ooh, maybe they've been reading Strong Towns." Like it wasn't like, "Please build a new gateway to the Pacific corridor." It was
Mhm.
like, "Can we actually maintain the assets that we have?" And so, maybe this is catching on. This is good.
Yeah,
I'm glad to see
we
it.
can we can only hope.
Yeah. Please, let's do unglamorous things. And meanwhile, we are also building a very showy community center that's going to be magnificent. But I don't know how we're going to be able to manage it. Financial assets to total liabilities. So
Yeah.
this is on a downward trajectory. This is one of those things where I'm trying to understand, like, our total financial assets. These are the things that the city, as a co-op, as something that we together own, that we have a whole, value stored in our city. But now we've started to take on liabilities that are related to this. Can you describe that a bit further and what might be some of the culprits here?
So this graph is the same as the first graph, except it's the difference between our financial assets, so how much money we have, and our total liabilities, so how much we owe. The differences in the first one is it's an absolute difference between the two, whereas
Okay.
this is the relative difference between the two, right? So one we're subtracting them to find the absolute difference. This one we're doing a ratio to find the relative difference. So what we're seeing is your assets are outpacing your liabilities because it is a positive number, and that it is getting to be a bigger number every year, which is
Yeah.
good. But this tells us, like, how quickly that is going up, right? And so
Hmm.
you can see it's kind of a flat line, so it's, or even like a bit of a decline. So basically, net financial position is getting better at a slower and slower rate, right? So even though it's
Yeah.
getting better every year, it's slowing. So that gives you a little bit more insight, a little different way to look at it. It also allows you to compare with other cities a little bit more easily,
Yeah.
because the the dollar amount in that financial position is not really
Right.
comparable
Yeah.
to a small city, but this as a ratio can give you a much better comparison if you want to do that. Of
Yeah.
course, always more important to compare to your own city over time than to compare to other cities.
Right.
You don't
Yeah.
want to end up being the dirtiest, the cleanest shirt in the dirty laundry. Not helpful,
Yeah.
or as Chuck would say, the prettiest horse at the glue factory.
Yeah.
That's not, that's not helpful. And so yeah, so again, want to focus as much as possible on your own city over time, but
Yeah.
there is some use to sometimes comparing with other cities.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I live in a 2.2 city. That's good to know.
that's yeah, that's
Um,
great. Yeah,
and
yeah.
again, just to explain to you, the reason why there's that big dip is because those numbers aren't there. So that is one of those examples where if you have incomplete info, we can probably draw a line. I would imagine by the time that I put in the 2013, 2014 numbers, we'll be able to see that line meet and basically you'll be able to more fully sketch that out. So, and sometimes that can be useful if you do want to go back and just see like what was my historic benchmark. There's interesting sort of ways in which we've really there's a story here in the numbers that are being shown in the graphs that are available.
Yeah.
Now we
And
go to the one. Yeah, yeah,
in saying you had a 2.2 city, that's interesting to say, because what that number means is that you have 2.2 times more cash than you have liabilities, right?
right.
And so compared to 10 years ago, where you had 2.4 or 2.6 times
Hmm.
the cash as liabilities. So as you can see, even though from that first graph you can see it's going up, now we can see it's not going up as fast as it used
Yeah,
to be, right? You're
yeah,
actually, and so that gives you just more information.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that relates to the way, I mean, our city council, we changed up, we had a long-term mayor that basically was the mayor of no, and typically opposed almost every like capital project and just like the bare minimum, or not bare minimum, but like core stuff was done, but none of the sort of expansive things. And then since then, we've started to really like lean into more symbolic or showy sort of because we had such a strong financial position.
Mhm.
And so I would be looking as a council member at maybe some of the indicators that are saying like we can go on this for a little bit, but I and maybe this is a point too where I mean Strong Towns often says we have underappreciated or under sort of counted the looming liability risk that we have of like,
Mhm.
we may say on a book value that the price of a pipe, or the value of a pipe like gradually declines, but like
Mhm.
a pipe just is like is a great pipe is a great pipe is a great pipe until it's not.
Mhm.
Then it's a blown pipe. And so this feels like one of those things that if we have gotten at all some of our accounting for the actual value of these assets or their current like value, that we're quickly going to be literally underwater with some of these pipes, but also dealing with those things. Can you describe that, like the
Yeah.
fact that on there's a book value of an asset and it declines over time, but it's an improper or sort of imprecise tool for measuring the real like state of what's in the ground and what's above the ground.
So yeah, so there's a lot here, but like I like your example of a pipe. So let's say we put in a pipe, it's $100 million pipe, and it's going to last 100 years, right? And so from a cash flow basis, or from a when we look at like, oh, the
Yeah.
next 10 years, the next whatever, it's going to cost us $0 a year, and we can look at that and be like, oh, we're doing fine, right?
Right.
But when you get to year 100, all of a sudden you have $100 million expense.
Yeah.
And people will be like, oh, why didn't we plan for this? That's exactly right, right? You could have put $1 million aside every year, and then at year 100, you have the money to replace the pipe, right?
Yeah.
That's what we tend to do in our households. Like we tend to, like, when we know there's a big expense coming up, we'll put money aside, save up for it. Some people say, oh, we can use debt. That's just doing it in reverse, right? Like you
Hmm.
still, once you've borrowed the $100 million, then you have to pay it back, right, over small chunks. So you're just reversing the payments. Either you set them aside year by year before, or you set them aside year by year after to pay off your debt. But either way, you have to put that money aside. You're forced to do it. So depreciation is how accountants try to
Yeah.
force city councils to put that money aside. So instead of saying like, you have $100 million pipe and you don't have to do anything until year 100, The accounting will say, well, in year one, this pipe is no longer worth $100 million. It's worth $99 million, right? And so that's a $1 million expense, right? That
Yeah.
isn't a real expense, but it goes in your depreciation. And so it's there so that a responsible city would be like, okay, we need to put this $1 million aside, right? And so what we'll see is there's two graphs that kind of work together: the net book to cost of TCA, which measures that depreciation, and your net financial position, which sort of measures how much cash you're putting aside, right? So those should kind of
Yeah.
work in lockstep with each other. And so, but what we find is cities are not putting that money aside. And so we can see that showing up in these graphs, right? So if we're not putting that money aside like we should be, that'll show up here.
Hmm.
The thing that's not perfect about it is that this is in accounting is done as a what they call straight line depreciation. It's just kind of an
Right.
average, right? So if it's a
Yeah.
100-year pipe, they take 1/100th of it every year for 100 years. If it's a
Yeah.
25-year fire truck, they take 1/25th of the year of it every year for 25 years. It's just a straight line. But of course,
Yeah.
stuff doesn't wear down evenly over time, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
It's fine for a couple of years, and then it gets really worse in a certain amount of years, and then it kind of flattens out, right? It's kind of more of an S curve in the way it depreciates.
Yeah.
And so the money is not as even in real life as it is in accounting. But if we at least followed accounting, we'd already be way better off, right, than
Right.
we are
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
The way a road works is the first 10, 15 years will require pretty much no maintenance, but then from years 15 to 25, like it'll just really get really bad really quickly. You can think of it as a car, right? It doesn't lose its value equally over time, right? Like they say, you drive it off the lot, you buy a new car, drive it off the lot, it loses 30% of its value the day you drive it off the lot,
Hmm.
right? That's not an even depreciation. So that's kind of what's going on here. And what cities have not been doing is planning
Yeah.
ahead for that. So what we're seeing is exactly this looming infrastructure crisis that there's a lot of old stuff that we own as
Yeah.
cities that is coming up for renewal that we have not planned
Yeah.
to have money set aside
Yeah.
for. So yeah.
That's where I wanted. I think you shared here the great urban three graph or slide, just like describing like this is the circumstances we and instinctively we know this, but it's to make sure that our systems are actually accounting for this. And to I
Mhm.
like what you said that like accounting is actually they've developed standards to help with this to keep us honest on this. But it's really then important that we take note of that and not sort of ignore those things. Um, we now are at the point, I think, we've had a lot of confusion of financial assets to total liabilities. Tell me, why did we add the word total and why does that matter?
So financial assets is just the stuff that is money, right? Or close to money. It's all the
Hmm.
cash your city has and anything that's like almost cash, like can be turned into cash real quick. Call that current assets sometimes, but financial assets. So it's money in savings accounts, it's money in checking accounts, it's the stuff you could use to pay your bills with, right?
Hmm.
When we do total assets, we add in all of the other stuff that's like capital assets, the stuff that is worth money, but we can't pay our bills with it, right? So a fire truck, a
Yeah.
road, a bridge, a swimming pool, they're all worth money. They're all worth something to the municipality. They could, in theory, sometimes be turned into money, but it would take a lot of time and a lot of effort to do that. And you can't pay
Mm.
your bills with it. If you get an invoice
Yeah.
from a contractor, you can't pay them in fire trucks, right? And
Right.
so when we're looking
You
at
can
finance,
privatize a road and make it a toll road, but very few
yeah,
people are willing to make
but
like,
it's a very
yeah.
big process and it would take a long time. And so like literally, if you have
Mhm.
invoices to pay, if you have employees to pay, if you have pension payments, like the stuff that requires money, like you can't use those to pay those because it
Yeah.
would take too long, right? You'd be overdue on your accounts before that gets turned into money. So when we're looking at financial assets, we just want to know like what are we able to pay in the immediate term uh,
Yeah.
as our as our liabilities come due, what are we able to pay?
Yeah.
Total assets and total liabilities, now we're counting everything that's worth money,
Yeah.
right? So that includes infrastructure, right? This
Yeah.
gives us a really good sense of, in total, are we getting richer as a city or are we getting poorer as a city, right? Because when you look at your own home, your own household budget, your own household finances, you don't only count um, the stuff that's cash, right? You don't only count your
Right.
cash, you count the value of your house, you'll count the value of, your stocks and your, whatever holdings, and all of that goes into measuring your personal wealth. And so this is the same thing, but for cities. We want to see that kind of same idea. As you can see from this trend here, it's a downward trend. So the city of Delta, even though it's putting more money aside, it is getting poorer over time, right? And
Yeah.
so that's when we start counting their capital assets, their infrastructure, we can see that those assets are getting worn down, more used up, and they're not getting replaced, right? So
Yeah.
that we can see it right away. There is a threshold here, which is 1 because it's a ratio. So if this line goes below 1, your city is actually literally insolvent,
Yeah.
right? So you're
Yeah.
still a ways away. You're still at 8, a ratio of about 8. But
Yeah.
cities like Houston have dipped below 0. Cities
Mm,
like New York have been below 0 for a while.
yeah.
Detroit went below 0. That means you are literally insolvent. If you're above 0, but your trend line is trending down, you might not be insolvent today, but you are certainly heading towards that.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's important to look at.
Are there any Canadian cities that we've studied that we are either like precariously close to zero or below it?
Winnipeg is getting much closer to there than Delta is.
Hmm.
Again, it's not necessarily how close you are. It's also the trend line, because you can always, you gotta recognize the trends, and you gotta make
Yeah.
the actions that you got put in place, the actions to reverse those trends to become a stronger city. I haven't seen all the cities. I don't know. But yeah, there are differences definitely
Hmm.
based on
Hmm.
the size of the city, based on the location of the city, based on past decision making in the city. Again, these are long-term trends. This is common to
Yeah.
basically every city in North America. And so it's not super useful to like point fingers and lay blame. We're all there.
Right.
We all got to do something.
Yeah.
We got to do the work.
Hmm.
And yeah, the closer you are to 1 here, or then the more urgent I would say it is for your city to take action. But I would say in any case, if you have a 10-year downward trend line like this, that points to a systemic issue that needs
Yeah.
addressing, even if you are, technically doing relatively well, again,
Right.
being the cleanest shirt in the laundry basket.
Yeah.
That's fine, but again, you do have a downward trend that you want to address.
Yeah. I want to be a pretty horse that has escaped the glue factory,
Yeah,
like just gotten
exactly.
out of Dodge, like
I,
clear out. Yeah.
yeah, I don't mind being a not pretty horse that has escaped that has escaped the
Yeah.
glue factory. Yeah.
This one confused me. So it was flat because
Mhm.
for a while we did have debt. Now we
Mhm.
don't, but it's showing flat. Is that a this tells me that I probably need to double check some of my numbers. Where would I go to
So
take a quick look?
no. So this is the part that everybody's confused with. Even some accountants get confused with this. Net debt doesn't have to do with debt. So net debt is a synonym for net financial liabilities, which is a synonym for having a negative net financial position,
Okay,
right? So delta, as you saw in our earlier graph of net financial position, it's a positive number.
right.
Therefore, you're in a net financial assets position. You're
Yeah.
not in a net financial liabilities or net debt. So your ratio here would be 0,
Okay.
because
Oh,
it's
so this is good.
you don't have a net debt. You don't your net financial position is positive. If it
Yeah.
was negative, then you have a net debt. And what we want to see is how big that net debt is in comparison to your
Yeah.
total revenues, right? And so if this is a line that is, if you have a negative net financial position, you're going to show up on this graph. And if your net financial position is getting worse as a proportion of your total revenues, this line is going to start going up. So
Okay. Yeah.
basically it's kind of tells you how many years of income it would take you to pay off, to get back into a positive net
Right.
financial
Yeah.
position, right? And if this line is trending up, that means it's going to start taking longer and longer and longer and
Yeah.
longer. It's definitely not where you want to be headed. So again, this is about comparing yourself over time. So if you have a negative net financial position, if you have a net debt, that's where you're starting from. That's what
Yeah.
it is, right?
Yeah.
But if you can see that over time, this net debt to total revenue line is trending down, that means you're making progress. That your revenue is rising faster than your net financial position is in the negative.
Yeah.
So that's a positive trend to be looking at. So
So
yeah.
if you think of it in a house term, if I borrowed $500,000 to buy a house, but then there's a collapse and say my house is only worth $250,000, we would say I'm underwater. That would show up in a situation like this, right?
Well, this is more of a comparison to your revenue. So
Right.
it's
Oh,
let's say
true.
you so
Yeah.
so let's say you have $50,000 in debt, or net financial liability, and you have $50,000 of revenue. That's
Yeah.
100%, right? And
Yeah.
that's going to take you that would take you an entire year's worth, right? So if we're
Hmm.
looking if it was 5%,
Yeah.
instead of 100%, that means like 5% you can kind of
You can
do
manage.
that
Yeah.
in in one
Hmm.
year, right? You could raise your revenues by 5%, pay off that net financial position, and it's no problem, right?
Yeah.
I'm saying 5%. Like if it was a small amount, it's not necessarily no problem, but it's in the realm of like, okay, we
Hmm.
can get through this in a couple of years. But if you're at 100% or 200% and rising,
Mm. Yeah.
that means it'll take you, you'd have to pay all of your income,
Yeah.
put it all aside in one go, um, and to erase that negative net financial
Yeah.
position is not something you can do. If you did it at 5% a year, it would take you 20 years. If it's 2.5%, it'd take you, a lot, 40 years. So that's kind of just to give you an idea of like how deep are you, compared to
Hmm.
how much money you have coming in every year. How long will it take to get back to a good place,
Yeah.
or a better
Yeah.
place? Yeah,
All right, so Delta's somewhat pretty horse. We're doing all right. Now let's go
yeah.
on to indicators that are about flexibility,
Hmm.
and our interest to total revenues indicator here.
Yeah. When you borrow money, that becomes your first responsibility as a city, is to pay back that money, pay the interest on that money, pay back that money, which reduces the flexibility you have, right? Because when tax money comes in, you are free to do with it as you please. You want to
Yeah,
spend it on pools, spend it on pools. You want to spend it on garbage pickup, spend it on garbage pickup. Your choice, your city, your choice, right? So you can decide what you want to do with your own money. But when you borrow money, all of a sudden there's a part of that money that is reserved, for debt payment, and is no longer your choice. You do
right.
not have that flexibility. If something unforeseen happens in the future, that part is not available, to help you deal with those unforeseen circumstances, right?
Yeah,
So any debt you have, any interest you're paying, is going to reduce your flexibility as a city to adapt and to deal with unforeseen circumstances. So
yeah,
you want to see how much of your interest is going, how much of your total revenue is going to interest payments, right? And the
right.
higher the amount, the less flexible you are. Again, with what the number is less important than the trend you're going in. If you're in the 2 to 3%, it's probably manageable. If you're in the 2 to 3% and rising, then you might be getting into
Yeah,
trouble. 4 or 5%, some cities do okay. But just know that the higher that number gets, the more difficult it's going to be for you to to deal
yeah,
with unforeseen circumstances, which there always are, right? So in Delta's case here, we see it was a declining trend. Of course, like you said, we saw all those articles that they were paying off their debt.
hmm
2023, they apparently have paid off their debt. So it is now at 0% of revenues going to
yeah,
interest, right? So
yeah.
that's a very flexible place to be in.
Which
So
is why now
yeah,
we're loading up on debt in 2025. So, this
right.
is
Yeah.
showing four sets of zeros here. Is that
Oh, that might be
just
an
because
error
it's
in the spreadsheet.
okay?
Yeah, there might be something in the, yeah, we'll have to look at that. But
And then
generally
okay.
it should give you percentages. Yeah.
And or is it just that it's 0.3, 0.6?
Well,
So because it's
it
less
might
than
be
one?
exactly that. And
Okay.
so we have made this to be whole numbers, so that they generally be 1, 2, 3, 4%. So if
Yeah.
it's all under one, and we're not showing a decimal here, it would all show at zero. So that might be what's going on this particular graph. But yeah,
So
again, it's the trend that
Delta
matters.
is showing off its mane. It's such a pretty
Yeah,
horse
yeah,
that the
that's right.
numbers, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Love it.
yeah,
All right. We've only got a couple more. Net book
yeah.
value to cost of tangible capital assets. I even stumbled to say this.
Hmm.
How do I understand this? And is this one that more flexible is good? So help me understand what's going
So
on here.
yeah, this is just a comparison. Again, we can use the car as an example. When you buy a car, that is the cost of the car, but you know that over time it depreciates. So what you paid for your car, the cost of your car, it's not necessarily what it's worth today. The sale, the resale value or the book value. right? And so that's what we're doing with our infrastructure here. We're just comparing what it's worth today compared to what we paid for it when we bought it, the cost. And so this can sort of give us a good indication of the remaining life of our infrastructure,
Hmm.
right? So in Delta's case, we're at like 60, probably 65%, 60, somewhere is around there. But as you can see, it's kind of a slow drop, right?
Yeah.
It's dropping over time. So this might be an indication that the city is falling behind on maintenance and on replacement, that your infrastructure is getting used up and not replaced. And so that puts the net financial position in perspective, right? Yeah, maybe you're putting money aside, but you're doing it at the expense of not maintaining or not keeping up with maintenance, right?
Hmm.
And so if you did keep up with maintenance, would you still be able to put money aside as
Right.
needed? The
Yeah.
question that's sort of the question that this makes you ask.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so this is, to me, is one of the more important graphs, because yeah, financially you can be, yeah, we're putting tons of money aside, but if you're just doing it by not fixing stuff, then you're not actually, meeting your citizens' needs as a city either, right?
Yeah.
So mhm.
And this is one that can get skewed when you bring new facilities online, right?
Yeah, so this doesn't differentiate between maintenance or I mean between replacing old infrastructure and adding new infrastructure. So if you have a lot of growth and you have developers that are providing you with quote
Yeah.
unquote free infrastructure, that's going to tend to push this line up, right?
Yeah.
At the same time, there's a lot of construction inflation. You're replacing infrastructure with higher dollar values.
Yeah.
This will also push this line up. And of course, if you're doing a lot
Right.
of and if you're doing a lot of replacement, that
Yeah.
will also push this line up. So all of these things will tend to push that line up.
Yeah.
So if you know that in your place, you're getting a lot of growth, you're getting a lot of inflation, you're doing a lot of maintenance, and still this line is falling, is continues to fall, that gives you an indication of how big your problem is, right? That
Yeah.
that you really have way more than you are able to keep up with. And of course that, this sort of evens it out. Um, because this is, like we said, we're doing the depreciation as in straight line amount.
Hmm.
And so what you see on the ground, like, when you're at the 60 to 65%, like it's probably noticeable that there's stuff that's not being fixed. Drop below 60, and it's really going to
Mm.
become very
Yeah.
evident.
Yeah.
You get a lot of complaints as a city. Um, but yeah, so again, not to say that this has to be at 100%. There's probably a sweet spot where you want to stay,
Yeah.
but generally you would like this to be kind of a flat line at a desired amount. So that means you're replacing everything as is needed. If it's dropping as a general trend, and of course this can go up and down from year to year depending on how much you're spending. So that's why it's important to look at the long-term trends to
Yeah.
like see past those
Yeah.
like jagged things, to just see what is the long-term trend. So yeah.
Hmm. Last one is our government transfers to total revenues, and we've called
Mhm.
this vulnerability,
Yeah.
which I think is exactly right. Can you describe just the significance of this and what we want to be looking for, and maybe what some of the warning signs are?
Yeah, so this is why we took out the government transfers as separate numbers earlier, is we want to see how much of our total revenue comes from another order of government, either the province or the state or the federal government. Because the larger that number is, those are amounts that we don't have any control over as a municipal government, as a city government. Somebody else chooses that for us, right? That's dependent
Hmm.
on the state legislature or the provincial legislature or federal government, whatever grants are available, whatever they decide to provide. And so the bigger a proportion of our total revenues that is, the more vulnerable we are to other people's decisions,
Yeah.
right? And that is kind of a problem. And that's when we look at Detroit's bankruptcy. They were not in a strong position, but they were highly vulnerable, because they depended a lot on
Hmm.
transfers from the state and from the federal government. And in the 2 or 3 years before they declared bankruptcy, a lot of those grants dried up. And so ultimately,
Yeah.
right, you can say like that was probably a contributing factor to their actual declaring bankruptcy, is that they did not have they were vulnerable to not getting those grants. And then on top of that, once they didn't get them, they didn't have the flexibility to adapt, right? And
Yeah.
so when you look at Delta here, kind of an upward trend, a little bit of a drop in 2024, which is a good thing. But as we've seen before, there have been these up and downs. But if we're looking at it like from 2014 to 2024, last 10 years, it's kind of an upward trend. So the city is maybe getting a little bit more dependent over
Mm,
time on government transfers. The numbers are still pretty low. It looks
yeah.
like two to between 2 and 6%. There are other cities that are at 20% or
Yeah.
25%. So
Yeah.
yeah. So again, perspective. But yeah,
Well, and
that's what this
yeah.
shows you.
A quick shout out to Warren in Ottawa, who had a conversation with the chief administrative officer for the city, or chief financial, one of the two,
Mhm.
and said that that leader had said, well, this is part of our strategy. We actually want that number to be really high, because
Mhm.
that means we're bringing in more pork and other, we're basically getting more than our
Mhm.
fair share. And that's what helps us to have nice things. Do you want to touch on why that is maybe a two-pronged strategy, with the second prong really biting you?
Yeah, so I mean, you have to recognize that the more somebody else is providing the money, the more their priorities will tend to seep into your decision
Mhm.
making. When when somebody provides the money, they kind of determine your priorities. So you are essentially giving up some local control in that way, in saying like we're not going to do the stuff that the local community cares about. We're going to do the stuff that the federal government cares about. So there is that loss of control a little bit.
Mhm.
There's also the fact that it is not necessarily a replicable strategy.
Right.
Ottawa being the national capital in Canada, um, possibly is in a unique position that they can become more dependent on the federal government, knowing that the federal government is not going to completely let them
Yeah.
fall into disrepair
Mhm.
because of that. But literally nobody else is the national capital. And
Yeah,
so
there probably won't
literally,
be potholes on Wellington Street, but
yeah,
everywhere
it,
else, maybe. Yeah.
exactly. And so, like again, like I said, it is a bit of a loss of local control in the sense that you won't be able to determine your own priorities. So it's not something I would recommend for my own city where I
Mhm.
live.
Yeah.
Again, everybody can make their own decisions in their own place, but that is the risk that you're facing in
Yeah.
that kind of strategy.
All right. So that's our 7 graphs. We'll be back in a moment to wrap up, but just dive in, take a look, look for it, sleuth, put on your detective's cap, and you're going to be able to actually begin to understand even more of the backstory of your community, as well as its current prospects, and sort of what the future might look like.